The first day at Oakwood High was supposed to be just another quiet chapter in Riley Carter's life. A fresh start. She wasn't here to make waves, just to finish her senior year and escape the clutches of the past. Riley was used to being the new girl, and she had perfected the art of staying under the radar. She walked off the bus with her head down, a single strap of her backpack over her shoulder, eyes scanning the intimidating brick walls of the school. She felt the weight of judgment even before she stepped inside. The halls of Oakwood High buzzed with the typical chaos of students, but to Riley they felt like a trap. She had already decided, blend in, keep quiet, and get through the year without drawing attention. But as soon as she entered the building, things started to change. The whispers began, soft at first like a distant hum. Eyes flicked her way, then darted away when she looked back. Riley was no stranger to this. Being a black girl in a school dominated by white faces had its challenges. She knew they were sizing her up, wondering what kind of person she was. Would she be loud, aggressive, a troublemaker? It didn't take long before she noticed the girl who would change everything. Jessica Lawson. She was tall, blonde, and effortlessly confident, the kind of girl who owned the school without trying. Her posse of loyal friends followed her like shadows. Monica, the quiet observer, and Ava, always the instigator. But it was the boys standing beside them that caught Riley's attention. Ryan, Jessica's older brother and the star football player, oozed arrogance. And then there was Trey, the chatterbox, always ready to stir up trouble. Riley had hoped for a peaceful start at Oakwood High, but that dream shattered as soon as lunch arrived. The cafeteria, typically a place where everyone found their social circles, felt like a war zone. Riley made her way to the farthest corner, choosing a table away from the chaos. She wasn't here to make friends, just to eat in peace and get through the day. But the moment she sat down, a cold, familiar feeling crept over her. The feeling of eyes on her. It didn't take long for Jessica Lawson to notice Riley sitting alone. From across the room, Jessica's eyes locked onto Riley, calculating, sizing her up. She had always been the queen of Oakwood High, the one everyone admired and feared in equal measure. Riley felt her pulse quicken as Jessica, with her entourage in tow, started to approach. It wasn't a coincidence. The whispers began again, louder this time. Riley barely looked up, trying to block out the noise, but she couldn't ignore the steady beat of tension building in the air. Jessica's voice rang out, smooth and dripping with mockery. Well, look at this, she said, her tone sweet but venomous. The new girl, all by herself. Riley didn't react. She just took a slow sip of her juice, refusing to give Jessica the satisfaction of a response. But the girls didn't stop. Monica sneered, "Shy, is she?" While Ava joined in with, "I probably think she's too good to talk to us." As the insults flew, the laughter grew louder, and a small crowd started to form around them. Riley could feel the weight of their gazes, the sharpness of their words. She remained unfazed, focusing on her food, trying to keep her composure. But Jessica wasn't done yet. With a sudden motion, Jessica flicked Riley's juice cup, sending the drink spilling across her tray. The cafeteria went quiet for a moment, the entire room waiting for Riley to break. But she didn't. She set her fork down, wiped her hand with a napkin, and stood up without a word. The room watched in stunned silence as Riley walked calmly to the trash can, discarded her ruined lunch, and laughed quietly to herself. It was a laugh that sent chills down Jessica's spine. It wasn't nervous or embarrassed. It was a laugh of someone who had seen it all before. And for the first time, Jessica felt something she wasn't used to, uncertainty. Sen interested in making enemies, but she could feel the shift. She was about to find out just how wrong she was to think she could remain invisible. The days that followed lunch were nothing short of a battle. At Oakwood High, Riley was no longer the new girl in the corner. She had become something else entirely. A challenge. Jessica and her friends, unwilling to let her be, kept pushing her buttons. It started small, little shoves in the hallway, whispered jabs in class, and more taunts during gym. Monica and Ava would accidentally bump into her, making sure she felt their presence. Trey would give her sarcastic grins during basketball practice, trying to provoke her into reacting, but Riley didn't react. Not once. At first, Jessica thought it was a strategy. She had seen it before, those who pretended to be unfazed, putting up walls to avoid showing weakness. But the more she tried to break through Riley's defenses, the more she realized something was off. Riley wasn't faking. She simply moved on, as if nothing had happened. The more they tried, the more confused Jessica became. She was used to seeing the fear, the anger, the embarrassment in the eyes of those she bullied. She expected Riley to crack, to raise her voice, to lash out, or at the very least to look upset. But Riley remained eerily calm, unbothered by every shove and insult. Riley didn't look at Jessica with hate. She didn't even look annoyed. In fact, sometimes Riley seemed almost bored, like this was all just another pointless game to her. And it drove Jessica crazy. Her attempts at humiliating Riley didn't have the effect she wanted. The crowd that once eagerly watched her torment the new girl now started to feel uneasy. The laughter wasn't as loud, and the whispers were filled with doubt. Riley's indifference was unsettling. It wasn't that she was weak, it was that she didn't care about the social hierarchies that Jessica had spent years building. Jessica wanted to break her, wanted to see the new girl fall apart. But Riley, she had a quiet strength that refused to bend. And with each passing day, Jessica's grip on control slipped a little further. Riley's silence, her calm resistance, had become something more than just not reacting. It had become a power all its own. And that power was starting to change everything. By the time lunch rolled around on the fourth day, the atmosphere at Oakwood High was charged with an uncomfortable energy. Jessica had spent the morning trying to rattle Riley, subtle taunts in class, a few more accidental bumps in the hallway. But nothing seemed to break her calm demeanor. It was as if Riley was a stone wall, and Jessica was the storm trying to knock it down. But today, Jessica was ready to escalate things. She had enough of this game. If Riley wasn't going to react to the small stuff, then maybe it was time to force her hand. The cafeteria buzzed with noise as usual, but Jessica's focus was sharp. She spotted Riley again, sitting alone at the same table in the corner, her gaze down, eating quietly as though the world around her didn't exist. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of power course through her. Today she was going to make Riley react. She wouldn't let the new girl walk through this school with her unbothered silence any longer. Jessica, flanked by Monica and Ava, approached Riley's table with a cocky smirk plastered on her face. Her crew followed her closely, knowing exactly what was about to happen. The crowd in the cafeteria, already aware of the tension between the two, began to quiet as Jessica neared. This was the moment. This was what they'd been waiting for. The showdown between the new girl and the queen of Oakwood High. Jessica leaned over Riley's table with a dramatic flourish, her hand hovering over Riley's untouched lunch. Well, look who's still sitting alone, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Don't you get tired of playing the tough girl, or are you just too good for us? Riley didn't flinch, didn't look up. She kept eating, her calmness only intensifying the fury boiling inside Jessica. Frustrated, Jessica knocked Riley's drink off the table, sending it splashing across the tray, soaking her food. The cafeteria fell silent, every eye now on Riley. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the splashing liquid. Riley exhaled slowly, her fingers curling around the edges of the tray. She set her fork down, wiped her hand with a napkin, and stood up. She didn't shout, she didn't scream. She simply walked over to the trash can, her movement slow and deliberate, and tossed her ruined lunch into it. And then, to Jessica's growing fury, Riley laughed, a quiet, almost amused laugh. The laughter was soft, but it held something sharp, something dangerous. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even anger. It was the laugh of someone who had seen it all before, someone who wasn't going to be broken. Jessica's smirk faltered. For the first time, she felt doubt creep in. What was she missing? Why wasn't Riley reacting the way everyone else did? As Riley walked away, calm as ever, Jessica's mind raced. She had expected Riley to beg for forgiveness, to back down, to show embarrassment, but instead, Riley had walked away untouched, unaffected. And for the first time, Jessica didn't feel in control. She felt something far worse. Uncertainty. The game had changed, and Jessica wasn't sure what to do with that. The cafeteria felt different the next day. There was a tension in the air that no one could quite place. The whispers had changed. They weren't about the new girl anymore. They were about Jessica and Riley. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was uncertainty. Jessica had noticed it too. When she walked into school that morning, the energy was off. People were looking at her, yes, but not in the same way they had before. It was as if they were watching a game unfold and the rules were shifting. Jessica wasn't used to Jessica stood frozen, her eyes wide, her mind racing. She had expected to break Riley, but instead, Riley had taken control in an instant. The crowd was silent now, watching in stunned disbelief. Riley didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She just stood there, calm and steady, as if she had known this moment was inevitable. And for the first time, Jessica felt something she had never felt before: doubt. Riley's warning had been more than a threat. It had been a promise. And Jessica had underestimated her completely. The days after the confrontation behind the gym were heavy with a sense of defeat that Jessica couldn't shake. The school had felt different since Riley had taken down Ryan and Trey. Whispers followed Jessica through the hallways, not about her victory, but about how she had failed. Riley hadn't just stood up for herself, she had dismantled Jessica's entire sense of control with a few swift, calculated moves. For the first time in years, Jessica wasn't the one in charge, and that realization ate at her like a relentless tide. Jessica sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria trying to hold her head high, but even she couldn't ignore the subtle shift in the air. People weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. There were no more whispers of awe or fear when she walked by. Instead, people were watching Riley, the new girl, the one who had come in like a storm and changed everything. Even the ones who still clung to Jessica's side, the Monicas and the Avas, seemed quieter, unsure of where they stood. It didn't help that every time Jessica saw Riley, she was always calm, always unbothered. Riley never sought attention, never tried to gloat about what had happened behind the gym. She simply went about her day as if nothing had changed, but something had. Riley's reputation was growing, and Jessica knew deep down that the tables had turned. Riley wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was someone to be respected, feared even. In the past, Jessica had thrived on power. She had built her kingdom on the back of fear and domination, always one step ahead. But Riley hadn't followed the rules. She hadn't been afraid of Jessica's bullying. She hadn't been intimidated by her crowd. And that made Jessica's carefully crafted world feel fragile. She couldn't help but replay the moment in the gym, the way Riley had moved with such precision and control. It wasn't just about fighting back. It was about taking charge of the situation, about remaining in control when everything around her was chaos. Jessica had never faced someone who didn't crumble under pressure, who didn't seek approval or validation. Riley had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had shattered the image Jessica had so carefully constructed. The realization hit Jessica harder than she had anticipated. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the queen of the school. She wasn't the one everyone was afraid of. Riley had taken that from her. The unshakable confidence that had once defined Jessica's every move was now gone, replaced by doubt. Jessica wasn't used to feeling this way. She had always been the one in control, but now she didn't even know how to fight back. And that terrified her more than anything else. The weight of the shift was undeniable. Riley had no idea how quickly everything had changed until she walked throughout the thoroughfares, up the halls of Oakwood High, and felt it in the air, the whispers, the sideways glances, the sudden quiet when she entered a room. The power dynamics that Jessica had carefully constructed over years had been torn down in a matter of days. And it wasn't because of anything Riley had done to force her way in. It was because Riley had remained composed, unbothered, and utterly in control in the face of Jessica's cruelty. And in the process, Jessica had lost everything. Riley didn't need to rub it in. She didn't need to brag or make a scene. She wasn't interested in replacing Jessica or taking her crown. That wasn't her fight. Her fight was about reclaiming her peace, standing her ground without letting anyone push her down, without needing to prove anything to anyone. And that was exactly what she did. She simply moved on. Every day, Riley sat at the same quiet corner table in the cafeteria, undisturbed, eating her lunch without fanfare. The students who had once ignored her now looked at her with curiosity, respect, and even admiration. Some of the boys from the basketball team nodded at her when they passed, acknowledging her strength and silence. A few of the girls who would have never given her the time of day now seemed hesitant, almost eager to sit next to her. Riley didn't seek their attention, though. She didn't seek anything from them. What shocked Jessica the most was how Riley had moved on, untouched by the drama. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't tried to take over Jessica's position at the top. Riley had simply decided that the social hierarchy didn't matter to her, and that was something Jessica couldn't. It hurt Jessica to watch someone who had never been part of her world so effortlessly rise above her without trying to compete, without needing to take her place. And it made her feel small. The reality was hard to swallow. Riley wasn't interested in playing Jessica's game. She had no desire to fight for dominance. She had already won, not by force, but by simply being herself. The moment came one afternoon when Riley, as usual, sat in the cafeteria with her lunch. Jessica, her pride on the line, couldn't stand it anymore. She walked up to Riley, her steps slower than they'd ever been before. But when she reached the table, Riley didn't look up at her. She didn't even acknowledge her presence. "We're done," Riley said quietly, without malice, without drama, but with an undeniable finality in her voice. Jessica froze. The words hit her like a slap to the face. She hadn't expected this. No confrontation, no fight, just the quiet certainty that Riley had moved on from her, from this whole situation. And just like that, Jessica realized that she was the one left behind. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It followed her through every hallway, every classroom, even the cafeteria. The power she had once wielded so easily had slipped right through her fingers, and no matter how hard she tried to clutch it, she couldn't get it back. It was as if the world around her had moved on, leaving her in the dust. Riley had won, without a single blow being struck, without a single word of confrontation. It had started with Riley walking away from Jessica's cruel taunts. Then it escalated to the moment in the gym when Riley had defended herself and put Jessica's crew in their place. Jessica had expected Riley to fall apart. She had expected her to crack under the pressure, but Riley didn't break. Riley had taken it all in stride, with an unshakable calm that only made Jessica feel more uncertain. It was as if Riley had been prepared for everything Jessica threw her way. But now it was different. Jessica no longer felt the admiration or fear she once commanded from her peers. Everywhere she went, people's gazes followed her with a sense of pity, not respect. It was impossible to ignore the whispers, the quiet conversations that swirled around her. They weren't talking about Jessica's power anymore. They were talking about Riley. Jessica sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria, trying to force herself to eat, but the food felt like cardboard in her mouth. Monica and Ava were silent beside her, their usual chatter replaced by uneasy glances. Ryan and Trey, once her loyal allies, sat across the room, their eyes downcast as they spoke in hushed tones. Even they couldn't ignore the shift. Jessica's reign had come to an end, and they knew it. Across the room, Riley sat alone as she always did. But today it was different. People weren't avoiding her anymore. Some of the basketball players nodded in her direction. A few girls who had once ridiculed her looked at her with a newfound respect. And Riley, she didn't notice. She didn't care. Jessica clenched her fists under the table, trying to quell the feeling of suffocation. She had spent years building this world, this system where she was at the top. And now it was crumbling in front of her. Riley wasn't just an obstacle. She had torn down everything Jessica had worked for. Riley had done it without lifting a finger, without ever trying to humiliate Jessica. She had simply moved on, and in doing so, she had left Jessica powerless. Jessica stood up, suddenly feeling the weight of it all. She walked toward Riley, determined to do something, anything to regain control. But as she approached, Riley didn't even look up. She didn't need to. With a calmness that sent a chill down Jessica's spine, Riley turned to her and said, "We're done." And in that moment, Jessica knew it was over. Riley had left her in the dust, not with anger, but with finality. There was no fight left to fight, no power left to take. For the first time in her life, Jessica had no control. And as Riley walked away, Jessica realized she never would again. The next morning at Oakwood High, everything felt different. The halls that had once felt like Jessica's domain now seemed alien to her. She walked through them with her head held high, but the weight of every whispered conversation, every sideways glance pressed on her. She couldn't escape it. The murmurs of, "Did you hear about Jessica?" were everywhere, but they weren't about her anymore. They were about Riley, about how she had come in and shaken everything up without so much as breaking a sweat. And it terrified Jessica more than anything. Once, Jessica had reveled in the power she had over Oakwood High. People feared her, admired her, and most of all, they respected her authority. She had set the social order, made the rules, and controlled who was in and who was out. But now that order had crumbled, and it was because of Riley. The way Riley had simply moved on and left Jessica clinging to a role she no longer fit into. Jessica felt it even as she sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria. The table that used to be her throne now felt like a lonely island. Monica and Ava sat silently beside her, their faces tense with unease. Ryan and Trey sat a few tables away, their eyes avoiding Jessica's. There was no laughter today, no casual banter, only a heavy silence that seemed to suffocate her. She had always been the center of attention, but now she was the one being watched with pity. Across the room, Riley sat by herself, as she always did. The difference now was that people weren't avoiding her. Some of the basketball team walked past, giving her a nod of respect. A few girls who once wouldn't have even noticed her now hovered around her table, exchanging cautious glances. Riley wasn't seeking attention. She didn't care for validation. But the power she now held was undeniable. Jessica clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. She was slipping. She could feel it, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The crown she had worn for so long was slipping from her head, and no matter how hard she tried to grab hold, it was gone. Riley hadn't even tried to take it. She had just walked away. But the worst part was how Riley had done it. She hadn't humiliated Jessica. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't even made a spectacle out of it. Riley had simply moved on with calm certainty and complete control. Riley had taken everything from Jessica without saying a word. And as Jessica sat in that cafeteria surrounded by the people who had once feared her, she realized just how powerless she had become. For the first time, Jessica wasn't the center of attention. Riley was, and Jessica, the girl who had once controlled everything, was now just another face in the crowd. The story of Jessica and Riley at Oakwood High is more than just a tale of high school drama. It's a powerful lesson about control, strength, and the true meaning of power. In life, we often believe that power comes from domination, from being the loudest, the most aggressive, or the one in control. Jessica spent years at the top, using fear and intimidation to maintain her place in the social hierarchy. She commanded attention, and everyone around her feared her wrath. But what Jessica failed to realize was that her power was fragile. It was based on the need to control others, to bend them to her will. Enter Riley, a girl who didn't seek power, attention, or validation. Riley didn't play by the same rules. She didn't react to Jessica's bullying. She didn't try to retaliate or humiliate Jessica back. Instead, she remained calm, composed, and true to herself. Riley's power came from something deeper. She didn't need anyone's approval, nor did she fear anyone's disapproval. She had control over herself, and that self-control became her greatest strength. This is where the lesson lies. True power doesn't come from forcing others into submission. It comes from within. It comes from knowing your worth, standing firm in your beliefs, and having the strength to remain calm in the face of adversity. When we stop trying to control the world around us and instead focus on controlling our reactions, we find that the world has less power over us than we ever thought. Jessica's downfall wasn't her failure to fight back, but her failure to realize that control and power are not about making others bend to your will. True power is about moving through life unshaken, remaining steady even when others try to knock you down. Riley didn't need to fight for dominance. She simply walked away with her dignity, and in doing so, she won. The next time you feel like the world is trying to push you down, remember Riley's lesson. Don't engage in the battle for control. Let others see your strength through your calmness, your silence, and your unwavering belief in yourself. That, my friends, is the true essence of power.